people in the future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey everybody, welcome. It is Monday, February 7th, 2022. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. Yes, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards and from across the country. And on Fridays, we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics as part of our Friday Politics Roundup. And check it in the Wednesday show with Cyril Michaleko. Cyril is a progressive columnist from the Bucks County Courier-Times and the Intelligencer, and now also the Bucks County Beacon. He joins me to drill down into Bucks County, Pennsylvania international politics. We just recorded our Wednesday show earlier today, so that'll be released out on Wednesday. I'm very, very psyched about that. I think you'll enjoy that one. It's good to have Cyril back in the seat. And you can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You know what? I'm going to cross Spotify off that list now. How's that? I'm going to replace that right now as we speak. We'll do something else. Spotify is, I'm going to take that off the list. Anyways, you can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can also help out the show right now by heading over to our YouTube channel, if you're not there already, and smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time we go live. You can hit up our Discord server by clicking on the link in today's show notes. And if you're looking for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, or subscribe to his podcast wherever you get your podcast. Head on over to thericksmithshow.com for all the latest across all his platforms. And you got to absolutely check out Season 2 of the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. Yes, the amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Just make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus and subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm leaving Spotify off of theirs too as well. And attention gamers, The Game Inn, that's with two N's. The Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they got everything from retro N64s, latest consoles, video games for all platforms, loads of collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, and kids get, discounts when they do good on their report card. How can you beat that? Check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn, that's with two N's. Got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message and drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. A special shout out, as always, goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan. That's with two N's, at SongADayMan on Twitter. Yes, indeed. Well, welcome, everybody. As you probably can already hear in my voice, I'm just a little bit off tonight. Not quite sure kind of what it is exactly, but it's been one of those days today. A little bit of the weather, a little weird weather today. We had freezing rain in the morning, and then it turned to snow where I'm at, and it snowed. It looked beautiful for about, an hour or so, and then it turned to rain. It got mucky, and I don't know. Just been one of those things. And it's also just been kind of one of these days in the news. I mean, I don't know about you, but holy cow, it's like Monday, And, it just got me, thinking about a lot of stuff and worrying about a lot of stuff and, just trying to figure out kind of where to go from here and blah, blah, blah. All sorts of possibilities. Like I said earlier today, we had a great, Cyril and I recorded our Wednesday show today, and that'll be up for you. I'll probably have an early release for patrons and be up for everybody on Wednesday. These are really positive conversations, but also kind of reflect, allows you to kind of reflect on the weight of where we're at right now, and just kind of makes you think. And then on top of all that, right? It's been one of these scheduling weird things where this every once in a while, it's kind of like the feast or famine thing, although that's a little bit extreme and dramatic. But like at in November, October, November, December, it was it was kind of purposely not scheduling guests some weeks because it was just rapid fire, and I had lots of scheduling going on. We had more guests than we had time for. It was just it was something else. And then the start of the new year, just have these, you just got to run into this once in a while. The people that you're reaching out to either don't get back to you, don't respond to your emails or things like this, or just the schedules haven't worked out quite yet. So, it's been kind of one of those kind of weird kind of week and a halves too as well. And I think it's also my own kind of mindset has been kind of colored by, the beginning of the semester at Kutztown University and the weight of just like another freaking semester of COVID. You know what I mean? I was talking to my daughter at dinner tonight, and she said something to me that just kind of made my kind of heart sink a little bit. She's like, she said, like, I'm having a hard time remembering school before masks. Right. And she's like, I'd like to say like to get it back to normal, but I don't even know what that would be. I'm not sure if I remember that. And again, I know that, we talk more about it. So there's certain things, yes, but that kind of sits with you. And it's like that too as well at on campus. And then, going back for the semester, and then, just kind of somewhere down the road, we're going to talk about this on the podcast, but not right now. But just some kind of weird stuff going on our campus that drives me crazy. And we'll see what happens. Anyways, so tonight, you got things that you want to talk about. I'd love to hear what you got to talk about. You got things in the news that are popping up. I'd love to hear from them. I'm just kind of looking to turn in, seeing what, like I said, it's been a crazy news day. I was going to go with some other things, and I was like, man, just look what's happened today. I'm reading some really kind of cool books right now, and so I thought I'd just give those shouts out to those, and so on. Also want to give a huge shout out to Amy Connect. Amy was my guest host on the Friday show this week, the Friday Politics Roundup, and we dug in on the Right for Bucks organization, and she had attended a meeting it was an open meeting, open Zoom meeting for Right for Bucks, and just to kind of see what it was about, I mean, because kind of like you hear about these, you hear about these organizations, you hear about stuff that's going on, and so they had an open meeting, so she decided to check it out, and holy moly, it was something. She was a great guest. Love having her on. We're gonna have her back on in a couple of weeks. We're gonna talk a little bit more about some of these kind of guaranteed income or basic incomes experiments that's going on. That kind of came up in a couple of our discussions about the experiments taking place in Philadelphia. Amy's done some research on that, so she'll be back on the show too as well to talk about that coming up. And I think that I've had a couple questions about this, so frankly, we'll see what happens if Sean's going to be able to come back on the show or not. Like I said, he's got a scheduling issue with his work calls on Friday, and there's only limited times which we both have space open, so hopefully he'll be able to come back on the show. I can urge you to get on Twitter and urge him to come back on the show, or urge him to find space in his schedule. I'd love to have him back on. I miss talking to him on Fridays, but I think that for now is that I've been thinking a lot about this past week, and this is just I don't know why I'm starting with this, but I'm thinking a lot about this week, that so what we're going to probably do, and we're going to try to bring in some rotating guest hosts on Fridays, and then maybe even doing versions of this show with interviews on Friday mornings too as well. So we're going to kind of be playing around with the format a little bit in our Friday show, and that's for kind of like several reasons, most notably that I've had to change up things since Sean had to change his schedule. So there it is. But anyways, if you have not checked out our last show, on our Friday show, do check that out. Again, this is about Amy, kind of fills us in on the organization Right for Bucks. I should have said this here. It's Andy Meehan's organization. He's this kind of like right-wing Republican that wants to kind of take over the Republican Party and turn everything into, the America First Trump agenda and so on. And it was a great conversation in part because it underscored how important it is to understand how organized these folks are. Right. These are not just a bunch of crazies coming out and kind of like sloganeering. They're actually kind of thinking about the organization it takes to kind of achieve power. So that's why this is a big deal. And so I guess I had that in the back of my head today, too, as I was thinking about tonight's show and as all these different news stories were dropping. And, specifically looking at what just happened with the Supreme Court tonight. I mean, like literally like 45 minutes before I started recording this, the decision that came down from the Supreme Court about Alabama, voting rights in Alabama, basically. So I'll just give you this piece, just to kind of the teaser if you haven't seen it already, from the New York Times. It's an article from the New York Times by Adam Liptak. Says the Supreme Court on Monday reinstated a voting map for congressional elections in Alabama that a lower court had said violated the Voting Rights Act by diluting the power of black voters to elect their chosen candidates. The vote was 5-4, with Chief Justice John Roberts joining the court's 3 quote-unquote liberal members in dissent. The Supreme Court's brief order, which included no reasoning, was provisional, staying the lower court's decision while the case moves forward. The justices said that they would hear Alabama's appeal of the lower court's ruling, but they did not say when. If the court follows its usual practices, it will schedule arguments for the fall, making it likely that the 2022 election is conducted using the challenged map. The court's eventual ruling would clarify and perhaps further limit the reach of the Voting Rights Act. In a concurring opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, of course, joined by Samuel Alito, said, quote, "The stay order does not make or signal any change to voting rights laws," unquote. It was necessary, he wrote, because the lower court had acted too soon before a coming election. So there's a bunch of notable things about this. So just so everyone's clear, there was, just like everyone, you have all the redistricting is taking place right now. The updated voting rights, our voting maps are taking place. Congressional voting maps are taking place as they do every 10 years after following the census. And in Alabama, they, of course, have a legislature that's dominated by Republicans, and they are gerrymandering maps to ensure that it cuts down on the impact and the power of black voters, by splitting the districts or concentrating them all in one district, and thereby, giving 2 districts to other white folks, things like that. The classic reason why we had, this pre-clearance process in the Voting Rights Act. This is precisely what got shot down by the Supreme Court in a previous ruling, right? So previously, that kind of move on the behalf of Alabama's legislature to kind of gerrymander the congressional districts and dilute the black voting power would have had to have been approved by by the federal government, right? Because there's a history of disenfranchising like African American voters, people of color. So but of course the Supreme Court said, nope, sorry. That's illegal. Everything's fine now. That was back then. This is now. We don't need it anymore. And now we're seeing exactly, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know already, but now we're seeing the results of that. We're seeing Alabama doing precisely what it had always done, right? And we're seeing other states, some who used to be covered by the Voting Rights Act or, the pre-clearance provisions, other states who are not, all doing the same thing. Right. And this has been one of the big stories. Right. This is why it was so devastating that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema decided that they wouldn't get rid of the filibuster in order to pass voting rights legislation. No, because they decided that, there's this made up thing called the filibuster, where all you have to do is kind of, decide that you don't want to, you don't have to argue for it or anything like this, like it used to be. But, it's not in the Constitution or anything like this, but they decided that was the sacred thing. Right. The filibuster was too sacred. We have to have super majorities in the Senate so that, who knows, that everybody comes to some compromise. I don't know. And we know in past the filibuster was used extensively at first, right? Or not at first, but when it first started getting a lot of use was to prevent civil rights legislation. And now here it is again. Except this time you have two Democrats, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who basically said, oh, Alabama, you want to kind of disenfranchise black voters? Go ahead. And so that's what they're doing. So that happens, right? The other thing that I wanted to point out here that I thought was really interesting in what Kavanaugh and Alito said, because I think that we're going to see this kind of language in their decisions moving forward. And the mainstream corporate media is not going to know what to do with this stuff because it's going to sound reasonable, right? So when Kavanaugh and Alito basically say the state order does not make or signal any change to voting rights laws, it was necessary because of some technical reason, right? Because he acted too soon before the coming election. Too soon? The new maps were just drawn, right? So it seemed like appropriate, right? New maps just drawn. Boom, we need to take care of this right away. And they're like, no, that's too soon. We have to wait till after there's been harm. They didn't say that directly, but that's what they're going to say. So we have to let the process work. And in the meantime, precisely as it says in this article, right, that's going to mean that the election is going to be conducted, most likely in 2022. The midterm elections are going to be conducted using the map that disenfranchises and limits the power of black voters in Alabama. Kavanaugh went on to write, say, when an election is close at hand, the rules of the road must be clear and settled, Kavanaugh wrote. Late judicial tinkering with election laws can lead to disruption and to unanticipated and unfair consequences for candidates, political parties, and voters, among others. Never mind if the tinkering of the congressional maps has unfair consequences for candidates, political parties, voters, amongst others. No. Only when someone flags it and says, wait a minute, there's a violation of the Voting Rights Act, that it becomes a problem. So, this is classic. We're going to see the same kind of, mark my words, we're going to see the same kind of logic, right? The idea like, well, like, we're really not kind of like limiting this kind of thing. We're just leaving it up to the states, or, this is just, we have got to see how it plays out. We don't know if this is going to have a negative impact. We're going to see all that kind of stuff play itself out. And the good old stenographers in the kind of some of the corporate media will kind of look at that and say, well, he sounds like reasonable and it's true. We don't know. We can't tell the future. So this side says this and this side says that. Who knows what's true, right? That's kind of like the kind of journalistic integrity that we've lived with for way longer. And, even though we saw there for a while where there was this really moment in kind of, in journalism, in mainstream journalism, where they had to contest with dealing with someone like Trump, right? Especially in that first year, when really had to kind of revisit what kind of journalistic ethics were, what it meant to be of the kind of fifth estate, what it meant to be, fourth estate. There's another. That's the whatever. What it meant to be the institution that was supposed to hold power accountable. And they said, well, maybe the way that we've done this kind of like both siders stuff doesn't really work right now because one side, the Trump side, is crazy. And they lie all the time. And they're saying things that are hurting people. So they had to kind of maybe dig in and decide that, no, maybe, journalism needs to be biased in favor of democracy. Journalism needs to be biased in favor of democracy if we are going to have anything, a democratic journalism that's worth its name, period. And that's small d Democrats. Just talking baseline stuff here. And here we see a direct assault on the foundations of, like, democracy. And I worry that we're going to see a problem. Even in this piece in the New York Times, right? It's a reported piece, right? So it's kind of like the decision has just come down, and so it's just saying, hey, this is what just happened, and this is what it says in the dissents. This is what it says in the opinion, right? There's not a lot of kind of like, like analysis and third party, fourth party, experts coming in and kind of weighing in on this. There are in a couple places, but it's news just broke. So meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, right, of course, we've got our own kind of Mapapalooza happening here. That there was well, here, this kind of came out today from Spotlight PA, from Kate Huang Pu, a Spotlight PA. And so here's her kind of leading piece on this. It says, an appellate judge has recommended that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court adopt congressional map passed by Republican-controlled General Assembly and rejected by Governor Tom Wolf, citing its legislative approval and how it reflects the GOP's geographic advantage. Right? This is rich in so many different ways. Right? So, well, let me read a little bit more. So, Commonwealth Court Judge Patricia McCullough selected the map from among more than a dozen proposals submitted by Wolf, top legislative leaders, citizen groups, and others as part of an ongoing lawsuit over the highly consequential district lines. McCullough was set to pick a final map before the state Supreme Court accepted a request to take over the process and asked her to instead make a recommendation. The High Court is not required to follow McCullough's counsel as it prepares to hold hearings on the map. The justices can pick one of the proposals, alter them, or draw a different map. Right? Now, if you remember about this, Sean and I talked about this a while back, and Sean was of the mind at the time that the Supreme Court is ultimately going to draw the map. They're not going to choose among these things, but we shall see. Right? The map was originally drawn by Amanda Holt, a noted redistricting advocate and former Republican Lehigh County Commissioner, and championed by Representative Seth Grove, right? That champion of democracy that he is. He's a Republican out of York. The original map was amended after Republican members of the House and State Government Committee, the panel that first considered the proposal, complained about divisions in their counties. This goes on. Now, McCullough, a Republican, presided over 2 days of hearings for more than 24 proposals. So here's what's getting set up, right? So you have all these proposals coming in. We're going to accept all these proposals, and the Commonwealth Court is going to pick one of them, right? And what McCullough is basically saying, the advice that she is giving the PA Supreme Court, is that, well, because the Republicans, who have complete control over the process, pass this map that is in their favor, she doesn't say the end of their favor of the property, because they passed it, that's approved by the legislature. So that gives it more weight than these citizen groups, or these groups over here, or this group over here. So that's the one that should be accepted. House Speaker Brian Cutler, again, a Republican out of Lancaster, right? We're saying that, I guess, Majority Leader Carrie Bedenhoff, they must have released, they released a statement that says, this map prioritizes the constitutional obligations of creating congressional districts in a nonpartisan way, using only data sets that were necessary to create compact and contiguous districts and promote communities of interest and respect Pennsylvania's national geography. That's what they say. And then a nice piece in Spotlight PA follows up. While the Pennsylvania Constitution has no explicit requirements for the state's congressional map, the courts have embraced neutral criteria like keeping district populations equal and minimizing county and municipal splits. Judges are also using relatively new tests like the efficiency gap, which indicates the number of wasted votes in each election or the number of votes that don't contribute to a candidate's victory to contribute to the partisan fairness of a map. So in other words, right, if you have a district that is split like, 52 to 48 Democrat or Republican, right? There are very few wasted votes in that, right? Because people, it's a contested election. If you have a district which is 80-20, you have a lot of people voting in that district that are just like, they didn't need to vote. I mean, it's so much overkill, right? That's when you kind of pack a district with one party or another in order to to maximize the impact for the other party. Unless basically you think about it like this: if you take all the kind of say, take the most democratic district in the state, right? And in many cases this happens to be also high concentrations of black minority voters, college students, right? All that kind of stuff. And you draw the line in such a way that puts them all in one district. So a candidate in there is like, a Republican doesn't even need to run in that district, right? Because there's no way in hell they're gonna win. But the reason why you pack them all in other district is so that means you make two districts that are surrounded that are dominated by the other party, right? That's part of that process. So anyways, so that's what they mean by this kind of efficiency thing about the wasted votes. So anyways, and so this is from Justin Valeri, Executive Director of Draw the Lines PA. This is a project of the Good Government Group Committee of 70. They said of McCullough's ruling, quote, "I think it's a reading that places more value on land than it does people." Right? So you might have seen some of these maps that have been circulating online that are not the congressional maps, but basically show where the population has been shifting in Pennsylvania. And literally you see the southeastern corner of Pennsylvania has gained a significant amount of population over the past 10 years. While as the rest of the state, Commonwealth, the rest of the Commonwealth has lost population. Right? So if the purpose of democracy is to make sure that the majority of people, right, not like topographical lines, but people are represented, then the congressional districts need to follow the people. What the Republican maps have tended to do is when you look at the map and the color breakdowns in the map, right, they can look like the more evenly distributed, right? But that's because some of those districts are completely empty of people, or have minimal numbers of people, or have decreasing amounts of people. It's the same principle of what happens in the US Senate, right? Every state gets 2 senators, right? So we have some states that get 2 votes in the Senate that have populations that are less than many cities in this country. The comparison was always brought up with Washington, D.C., right? Washington, D.C., right, is unrepresented, does not get voting representation in the House and the Senate. But what happens? So they don't get that. They're disenfranchised. But the population of Washington, D.C. is greater than some states in the nation. So you have a geographical bias, right? You have a rural bias. You have a land bias instead of a people bias, right? And as we know, democracy means rule by the people, not rule by acres. And this is the kind of stuff that's becoming more and more clear to people as they start to revisit these institutions. We look at the Supreme Court, right? Same thing. You have a court that is dominated. This is great. Dominated by justices who are appointed by presidents who got a minority of the popular vote. Right? So yes, Donald Trump won the Electoral College, but he got blown away in the popular vote. And yet he appointed 3 justices. That's disenfranchisement in the Supreme Court. That happens in the Senate, and that happens there. And so what we have in Pennsylvania right here is we have this one judge, who's basically saying, you're going to give us the suggestion to move forward. Now, as Sean has said in the past, on the show, is that most likely the Supreme Court is actually just going to redraw the maps. But, we shall see. We shall see. So that's another one of those fun little bits of things that happened today. Now, the other thing that has been, I have just been watching and reading about in fascination has been what's happening in Canada. I know people have been following this very much, but Ottawa, which is, the capital of Canada, Ottawa has been shut down now for 11 days. There's these protests. There's these protests against mask mandates, against vaccine mandates, and so on. And the same kind of stuff that we're having here on our far right, right? Except, you don't expect this in Canada, right? I mean, Canada, all the people kind of get along out there, right? They kind of, they have their differences and all, but again, that's an American perspective or whatever. But truckers, so basically these things got kind of launched, right? When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau kind of put in a vaccine mandate for truckers, right, who are coming to the United States, or they're coming back into Canada. And so the idea is that look, you got these truckers who are going over to the United States. The United States is kind of like crazy. It's got the highest death rate of any country, like any developed country on the planet, and has no COVID protocols and so on. So you want to make sure that that's not then therefore spreading into Canada, right? So they didn't say shut down, no truckers are allowed to go for no, Joe. But if you'd be going back and forth, you'd be transporting goods also, you need to be vaccinated, right? So if you remember what happened with Biden was trying to kind of say that, okay, you need to have a vaccine mandate that in companies. This is kind of along those same lines. So that began these protests. These truckers started showing up in Ottawa and protesting and demonstrating against these vaccine mandates, right? And of course, that snowballed very quickly into, not just vaccine mandates, but masking and social distancing and any kind of COVID protocols whatsoever, right? And they're, surprise, surprise, what's their main cry, right? What's the protest for? Is freedom, right? It's because these truckers refuse to get a vaccine and they want their freedom, right? Now, the crazy thing is, here, let me just read you a little bit from them. This is also from the New York Times. Actually, here, let me read you this. This is from the Washington Post. The Washington Post has got this literally just kind of went up 7 minutes ago. This is how crazy this day has been. Or there's an updated audio one. I'm sorry. This went up about an hour ago, shortly before we went on here. So this is from the Washington Post. Canada's capital is long used to hosting protests, but the self-described Freedom Convoy has been an unusual and intimidating presence in Ottawa since it rolled up nearly a dozen days ago with its snowballing list of grievances, from opposition to vaccine mandates and lockdowns to antipathy toward recently elected Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Big rigs and other vehicles continue to block crucial downtown arteries, snarling traffic, blaring their horns, and fraying residents' nerves. The protests have had the effect of forcing several businesses to close because of safety concerns. National monuments are now fenced off after protesters desecrated them. And in a surreal scene, a man on horseback trips down the road in front of Parliament on the weekend waving a Trump 2024 flag in Canada. Really? This is really, I love that. That was like your opening 2 paragraphs, right, of this Washington Post story. What's fascinating to me about this is okay, look, people have the right to protest, right? Protest peacefully. I'm not going to poo-poo direct action, okay, at all. But you think about how there is this interlinked and international connection among right-wing organizations. And if you start looking at some of the reporting, and we're probably going to follow up this on Friday, but if you look at some of the reporting about the money lines, there's these kind of several different kind of like open accounts and people are kind of funneling all sorts of money into these protests, right? And they're international. Like you're getting kind of donations from people all over the world, from these kind of right-wing funders and these billionaires and stuff who are all in this kind of like, autocratic kind of Trumpy kind of mindset when it comes to COVID and when it comes to freedom. And they're funneling money into this, right, in order to kind of keep this turmoil going, right? And there's this podcast. Oh, I meant to bring this up beforehand. There's this podcast that Amy Connect kind of told me about. She shot me a message this week and was telling me about. Here, let me see if I can bring it up real quick. I'm just drawing a blank. I was literally just thinking about it before I got on here. Let's see. Oh, it's called Verified, right? And the Verified podcast, it is an NPR podcast, and the new season of this focuses on extremism, the kind of extremism networks that connects the January 6 actors to these international context. This kind of white supremacy stuff, extremist kind of donors and protest networks and so on. And so I've listened to the first couple episodes on that, which is really, really interesting. And it kind of points to what a lot of kind of researchers have been following, right? It's like looking at, there's this kind of now global kind of interconnectedness of these kind of right-wing extremist groups. And so that money is funneling into these Canadian protests as well. The crazy thing about this, and this, I came across this one article that was talking about it. Hold on just a second. This article that was talking about it, and what they said is that there was several people were puzzled initially because Canada doesn't have the kind of extremist media environment that we have here in this country. And there had been several attempts to launch, kind of right-wing networks like OAN and all this stuff. And of course, a lot of these are on the internet, so you can access them on the internet. But there isn't that kind of media culture, right? You have the kind of the CBC, kind of like the BBC over in England, and that has kind of been a phenomenal kind of news organization, kind of public news organization, and so on. And so people were kind of, well, where how are these flames being like fanned? And of course a lot of it's social media, what we all going to say here, but the remarkable thing is that they trace a lot of this stuff back to people's consumption habits with Fox News, because even though Fox News is not broadcast and doesn't have the legs in Canada, right? Some people subscribe to different cable companies and satellite programs who get that, right? So they're watching US news, following this and using that and applying it back on what's happening in Canada. It's crazy, right? So that Verified podcast, I would definitely check that out. It's super good. It's super good in an NPR way. Let me put it that way, right? Because it's telling a story to people who are largely uninitiated to kind of the depth of this kind of extremism. For those folks who've been listening to this podcast, been following Raging Chicken for the past several years, this is not going to be news to you, but they do a really good job of kind of teasing out these networks. So as that podcast is launched, and then I'm also reading this book right now. I'm almost done with it. It's called "Bring the War Home: The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America." It's by Kathleen Belew, and it's really excellent. Now, this is not about the present, right? This is about kind of the rise of this kind of white power militant movement that kind of follows the Vietnam War. And why this book is so excellent is it does a couple things. Like, one, it looks at patterns and culture, right? And what happened then in terms of a cultural shift within this kind of white supremacist extremist kind of movements, and how it got solidified away from these disparate kind of militias and clan groups and all this kind of stuff into this kind of cohesive cultural narrative around white power. It's really a fascinating book, and she documents it well. The thing that I found really fascinating about it is that these white power groups, these early white power groups, were extraordinarily active on the early internet, like back when there were just message boards, right? When you actually had to kind of like no DOS and kind of like, you know, like send commands and all that kind of stuff. The original message boards that were, you know, that kind of flooded, the, you know, started kind of moving and, you know, rising in the 1980s and into the 90s. And they recognized it early on that this was going to be a place where you could communicate and you can have this dispersed kind of quote unquote leaderless movement that was brought together through these kind of cultural means, right, in these media spaces. And again, she's talking about in this book, she's, you know, and it's incredibly documented. She's a historian. It's incredibly documented, and she's looking at this period from, you know, the 1970s and 80s and the 90s, and then she kind of comes up towards the present, kind of not quite there. And it shows you, right, what was happening then. You have a similar process that's happening now. The big difference is that now the development of some of these networks, right, we saw Fortran and Atran and all this other kind of stuff, is coming with a ton of money, right? What they were doing back then, these white power groups, right, they were actually robbing banks, robbing armored cars, and that's how they're getting a good chunk of their money. Now you've got billionaires who are funneling money into these groups and to kind of helping build out those networks that allow this stuff to take place. So that's the crazy part. So anyways, what does this all have to do with everything? Well, you know, there you go. So you're having kind of these voting rights restrictions. We have a Supreme Court now that is kind of basically allowing Alabama to disenfranchise black voters. We have pushes here by the PAGOP in order to instate a map that is, you know, it represents land more than people. And then we have this kind of internationalization, right, of this kind of authoritarian stuff around cultural issues around masks and mandates happening in Canada. And I really do think that how that struggle plays out in Canada is going to be duplicated, right? I do think that this is something to watch. So you haven't been paying attention to what's going on up there in Canada and Ottawa. This is really useful to take a look at, because it's going to, a lot of the themes, a lot of the arguments, a lot of the sloganeering, right, and kind of say the cultural content of these kind of, you know, these right-wing protests are going to flood the globe from my perspective. So anyways, that's what we got. One other thing that I thought I'd mention, you know, again, this is all stuff that broke today. That's why I say, like, okay, this is what we're going to do tonight. Is that the National Archives, people saw this, retrieved 15 boxes of the Trump White House documents from Mar-a-Lago, right? And two things have been happening over the past couple of days. Like, one, you have these, it turns out that, you know, there were all sorts of boxes and bags of presidential letters and papers that Trump would routinely like hand shred, which is illegal. And you had actually teams of people who were actually worked in the White House staff would have to go back and try to tape them all back together, because it's like, you know, it's a federal law. It's a crime to do that. And there were other ones that were slated to put in these bags and stuff to go get burned, right? To just like, you know, to torch them all, which again, these are serious federal crimes. And there's also apparently there's a provision in the law. I wish I had the name of the law up. There's a provision in the law that basically, the Presidential Records Act, whatever that might be, that says that if there's a violation of these things, right, if there's records that are destroyed as part of this, then that person should be barred from having any future office, right? So we'll see if they're going to actually follow through with that. But so here's just a little taste of this story. So the National Archives, this is from CNBC. The National Archives and Records Administration last month retrieved 15 boxes of White House records that had been sent to former President Donald Trump's resort home, Mar-a-Lago, instead of the National Archives as required by law, the agency said on Monday. The documents include a letter to Trump from his predecessor, President Barack Obama, as well as Trump's self-described love letters with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, according to the Washington Post, which first reported the National Archives action, citing people familiar with the story. In a statement to NBC News Monday afternoon, the National Archives confirmed that it arranged for the transport of 15 boxes of presidential records out of Trump's Palm Beach, Florida residence in mid-January, quote, following discussions with President Trump's representatives in 2021, unquote. Yeah. So there you go. Kind of fun. here's this piece of this law. This says, so all the records should have been handed over to the National Archives directly from the White House once Trump left office in January 2021, as required by the Presidential Records Act, the agency noted. That law, quote, mandates that all presidential records must be properly preserved by each administration so that a complete set of presidential records is transferred to the National Archives at the end of the administration. Right? That's according to U.S. Archivist David Ferriero in a statement. So it goes on. So we shall see. We shall see where all that goes. That's just kind of another kind of item. One thing that I'll kind of close out on tonight is that what's remarkable to me, if you watched Chris Hayes the other night, I think it was must have been the Friday night show. And I'm going to space the names of the two people he had on, but there was a journalist from Las Vegas, from Nevada, excellent journalist, and another excellent journalist from Florida, who have done great investigative work and have been uncovering, exposing a bunch of stuff. Matt Gaetz, kind of down in Florida, in addition to all the kind of nonsense that's happening down there with Governor DeSantis, and then in Nevada. They, it's become a really kind of critical state. And so a lot of the kind of wheeling and dealing and kind of behind the scenes stuff and attempts at kind of doing weird things with elections, this other guy is covering. So anyways, they're having this discussion. And it was a good discussion, right? Except what drives me crazy is that they get to this point where they say, well, surely now that, this legislator, this, representative or whatever, has been exposed as, as not being Trump enough, right? Or is his switch sides if that's gonna sink his chances of being reelected. And they're like, oh yeah, because these facts are gonna clearly prove it. I'm like, how can you live through the past several years and actually think that the facts being out there by themselves are going to automatically lead to kind of an automatic conclusion where this person will obviously not be elected? It's just insane. All the facts fly in the face of that kind of discussion. But it is this wishful thinking of normality, people wanting just to kind of like, oh yeah, let's get back to the way things were. Let's get back to things when these kind of scandals broke, it would sink their career. Oh, it must be, finally, this is going to be the final straw. Are we not sick of that narrative? Has that not been so exposed as being so utterly bankrupt as a way of thinking about it? Now, look, I am not saying that those things won't have an effect. All I am saying is this. It's critical for the media now not to offer that narrative as a way of kind of making people feel like things are going to be taken care of. You can include it as part of analysis, but you should also always say, we can't guarantee that because we have been proven wrong. That most of these candidates, these far-right candidates, have been able to stay in office and, matter of fact, have run on their own corruption and won their seats. Come on. So anyways, that's going to be it for me tonight, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for kind of continue to support the show and everything. I'm sorry I'm a little tired tonight. It's just been kind of one of those days, as I said at the top of the show. And I also know that there's a bunch of folks who are over at the Pennridge school board meeting tonight. They had the school board meeting and the curricular meeting. So keep your eyes on that tomorrow, and later on tonight, actually, there'll be, people coming out of that meeting with information, what's going on. I know there's several folks who've been organizing here in in Bucks County who are out, or in the Pennridge School District, who are out at that meeting tonight. This is after, of course, Pennridge has, been going after, banning certain books from the kind of libraries and saying that, no, we're not going to follow any kind of mandates or any kind of medical advice when it comes to keeping our kids safe in schools from COVID. So that'll happen. So that's it. Remind you that on Wednesday, like I said, we'll probably release it early. We've got the show with Cyril. that will drop on Wednesday, and then on Friday, keep your keep your ears to the ground, I guess. Yeah, about what's going to happen on Friday. We got several different options about what we're going to do on Friday. We might have a guest. We might have another guest host on Friday. We might actually do an interview show on Friday, but I'll keep you posted. So thank you all for tuning in, everybody. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Want to thank you for your support. Want to thank you for your subscriptions. Want to thank you for supporting the show. Support the show. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. Become a patron for as little $5 a month. We'll see you on the flip side, everybody. See ya!